The wind cut across the dry plains like a whispered warning, carrying the scent of dust, horse sweat, and pine smoke. At the edge of a crumbling ranch house, a boy no older than 12 clutched a weathered rifle, his knuckles white against the worn wood. He didn't know how he had ended up here, only that the world had folded in around him, parents gone, townfolk wary, and a ranch that seemed to despise his very shadow. He had been running for days, guided by desperation more than sense. Every footstep had echoed with loss, every gust of wind seemed to call out the names of those he had loved and lost. His name was Eli, though he wasn't sure he belonged to it anymore. He had come to the McAllister Ranch seeking shelter, but the moment he crossed the corral gate, the cattle stamped as if sensing a foreign presence, and the old ranch hand's eyes narrowed like knives. The McAllister Ranch was a monument to old grudges. Generations of McAllisters had built it, blood and sweat binding every plank and post. But the current owner, Silas McAllister, was a man whose heart had hardened after a tragedy long ago, a fire that had claimed his wife, a betrayal that had driven his brother to leave town. He did not trust strangers, and he certainly did not trust orphans, who wandered into his life clutching a gun. Eli lingered at the gate, his breath clouding in the crisp morning air. From the cabin, he could see movement. Silas, a broad-shouldered man with eyes like steel, tightening the reins of his horse. "What do you want, boy?" the man called, voice rough as gravel, but not unkind. I'm looking for work," Eli said, his voice trembling despite his effort to seem brave. I can feed the horses, mend fences, whatever needs doing." Silas studied him for a long moment, then spat into the dirt. "A gun in your hands doesn't make a man. You know how to handle it, though." Eli nodded. "Yes, sir, but only to protect myself." "Protect yourself or others?" Silas asked, his gaze piercing. Eli hesitated. He had learned early that lying could be dangerous, but truth could be dangerous too. "Both, sir," he whispered. Silas's jaw tightened, and he finally turned toward the barn, motioning with a sharp flick of his hand. "You can start there. But know this ranch doesn't forgive easily. One misstep, and you'll be gone before sundown." The boy nodded, swallowing hard as he stepped toward the barn, each creak of the wooden boards beneath his boots echoing like a countdown. Inside, the smell of hay and horse sweat wrapped around him like a strange kind of home. He began brushing the horses, careful, methodical, wishing for the courage he didn't yet have. That evening, the sky bled crimson as the sun sank behind the distant mesas. Eli sat by the edge of the corral, rifle resting across his lap, and watched the McAllister Ranch stretch into the twilight. He thought of the families he had lost, of the streets of the town where he had grown up, and a deep, gnawing loneliness pressed into his chest. Then came the sound, hoofbeats, sudden and urgent, thundering across the plains. Silas appeared at the gate, his hat low, eyes narrowing at the horizon. "Trouble," he muttered, more to himself than to Eli. The boy's pulse quickened. Instinct took over fear, and he lifted the rifle, shoulder trembling slightly. A figure emerged from the dust, a man on horseback, face shadowed, a wanted poster probably worth a small fortune. He slowed only when the ranch's gate swung open, the wind carrying the scent of gunpowder before the shot could even be fired. Silas's hand went to his side, but before he could draw, the stranger was already yelling, spurs clanging, eyes wild. Eli froze, heart hammering. This was the moment that would change everything. One decision, one action, and the course of his fragile, orphaned life would twist forever. The stranger's horse reared, and in that instant, Eli had to choose step back or step forward. The wind stilled, the sun's last rays slicing through the clouds, and Eli's fingers tightened around the gun. A single shot echoed across the plains, and then silence. The echo of that single gunshot lingered in the evening air, sharp and accusing, as Eli's heart pounded like a war drum. Dust swirled around the corral, catching the dying sunlight in streaks of gold and red. When the haze cleared, the stranger lay sprawled across the dirt, clutching his side, eyes wide with shock and pain. Silas McAllister didn't flinch. He had seen death, betrayal, and loss carve themselves into the land and men alike. But what he saw in Eli's face, fear, hesitation, yet a flicker of courage, was something new. He strode over, heavy boots kicking up clouds of dust. "You didn't have to do that, boy," he said quietly, voice rougher than the canyon wind. I didn't want to, sir," Eli stammered, the rifle trembling in his hands. "But he was going to. He had a gun." His words faltered as tears pricked at his eyes. He had taken a life, even if only barely, and it felt like the ground had shifted under him. Silas studied the boy for a long moment, then knelt beside the stranger, examining the wound. "He'll live, barely. But mark my words, Eli, gone doesn't fix anything. It just shows the choices you've made." The boy's chest tightened. Choices every day, for as long as he could remember. Choices had been the difference between surviving and vanishing into nothing. Yet he had never faced one like this. That night, Eli slept on a cot in the barn, the smell of hay mingling with fear. Outside, the ranch seemed alive with whispers, the wind through the fences, the rustle of the horses, the distant howl of a coyote. And though Silas's cabin door remained firmly shut, Eli felt the weight of eyes upon him. Not hostile eyes exactly, but cautious, calculating, measuring whether the boy could belong in a world that demanded hard edges. Days passed. Eli worked the ranch, repairing fences, feeding the animals, learning the rhythm of the land. Silas watched him quietly, the silence a test of character. Slowly, trust grew small, almost imperceptible, like new shoots breaking through dry soil. Eli even began to smile, though never fully, and the memory of home and family that had been ripped away clung to him like a shadow. One evening, as the sky burned orange and purple, a carriage rattled into the ranch yard. A woman stepped down, cloak dusted with travel. Her eyes were sharp but kind, and when she looked at Eli, a flicker of recognition passed through her. "You're the boy from the Miller place, aren't you?" she asked gently. Eli stiffened. He hadn't spoken of his family, he hadn't dared, but something in her voice made him want to trust. My name is Eli," he said. "I'm Abigail," she said, kneeling to his level. "I knew your parents. I promised them I'd keep an eye on you if anything ever happened." Her voice faltered, and Eli saw the same loss mirrored in her eyes that he carried in his heart. Before he could respond, a sharp whistle split the air. The stranger from the plains, the man Eli had shot, had recovered faster than expected, and he was not alone. Behind him rode two others, faces masked by scarves, rifles glinting in the afternoon sun. Silas's hand hovered near his holster. "Looks like the past just rode back in," he muttered. He glanced at Eli, eyes hard but steady. "You ready, boy?" Eli swallowed. He had never wanted to be a hero, never wanted this life. But the land, the horses, the ranch that had given him the smallest taste of belonging, it was all worth fighting for. He lifted his rifle, shoulders squared. "Yes, sir," he said, voice trembling but resolute. The strangers approached fast, dust churning around their horses' hooves. The tension was a living thing, stretching across the ranch like an invisible wire, ready to snap. Eli felt the weight of every lesson, every choice, every memory pressing down, and then the first gunshot rang out. It struck the ground near the corral, throwing up dirt and rocks, and the fight for the ranch and Eli's soul had begun. But as the dust swirled and gunfire cracked against the wooden fences, Eli caught sight of Abigail standing behind the gate, her hands gripping the rails. For the first time in months, he felt more than fear, he felt something worth defending. Because sometimes surviving wasn't enough. Sometimes survival meant standing for something bigger than yourself. The wind carried the echoes of the battle across the prairie, and in the distance a storm began to roll in, dark clouds blotting the sky, lightning flashing across the horizon. The ranch that couldn't forgive had been tested, and it was about to demand everything Eli had. The storm broke with a fury that matched the chaos in Eli's heart. Rain hammered the plains, turning the earth into a treacherous sea of mud. Lightning ripped across the sky, revealing the dark shapes of the men who had dared to challenge the McAllister ranch. Gunfire cracked and echoed, a deadly rhythm in the storm. But through it all, Eli felt a strange, cold clarity. The fear that had been his constant companion was gone. He was no longer just a lost boy running from his past. He was a defender. He was part of something worth fighting for. Beside him, Silas moved like a vengeful ghost, his eyes hard as flint. But as Eli dove for cover behind a splintered fence post, firing with a hand that had stopped shaking, he caught a glimpse of Silas's expression. It was a subtle nod, a silent acknowledgement of the boy he had once distrusted. The attackers had seen a scared kid, an easy target. They hadn't counted on how fast a boy with nothing left to lose could learn. He'd learned the rhythm of the land, the patience taught by the endless horizon, and the iron resolve of a man with his back against the wall. A bullet whizzed past his ear, and he ducked lower, the sting of rain on his face mixing with the sweat of exertion. Every lesson his parents had ever taught him, every memory of loss, every night spent hungry and afraid, it all came rushing back, not as a weight, but as fuel. This wasn't just about survival anymore. This was about justice, a debt being paid in courage and grit. Through the roar of the storm, Abigail's voice cut through, steady and unwavering. "Eli, to the barn. Get the horses to safety." She moved with an impossible calm, a beacon of strength in the swirling violence, guiding the terrified animals. For a fleeting moment, their eyes met, and that single look, an unspoken promise, passed between them. Promise of trust, of hope, of a place to belong. The attack began to crumble. The raiders, so confident moments before, started to falter. One of them, a young man barely older than Eli, dropped his rifle, his face a mask of pure terror. Then Eli saw him, the leader, the man whose arm he had shot days earlier. The man's eyes locked onto Eli, blazing with a mixture of fury and disbelief. He raised his weapon, a guttural snarl on his lips. But before he could fire, Silas materialized from the shadows, his revolver already aimed. The storm's thunder swallowed the man's final, defiant cry, and just like that, it was over. The gunfire ceased. A heavy silence descended, broken only by the steady drumming of the rain and the soft, nervous whinnies of the horses in the barn. Eli's strength gave out, and he sank to his knees in the mud, his face streaked with dirt and blood, the rifle resting across his lap. He had done it. He had faced the specter of death and stared it down, and in doing so, he had carved out a place for himself in this harsh, unforgiving world. Silas walked toward him, his hardened features softened by an emotion Eli had never seen on him before: pride. He crouched down, his voice low and raspy. "You did well," he said. The words were simple, but they carried the weight of a lifetime of judgment finally lifted. "This ranch, it has a way of forgiving, but it only forgives those willing to fight for it. And you, boy, you've proven you can fight." Eli looked up, but no words would come. It felt as though the years of anger and suspicion that had haunted the McAllister ranch were beginning to melt away, replaced by a fragile, tentative warmth. He had survived, yes, but in the smoke and the mud, he had found something he thought he'd lost forever: a family. Abigail approached, her cloak dripping with rain. She placed a gentle hand on his shoulder, her touch a comforting anchor in the aftermath. "Your parents would be proud," she said softly, her voice thick with emotion. "And so am I." A lump formed in Eli's throat. The years of loneliness, the constant fear, the gnawing emptiness, it all rose up inside him, spilling over in tears. But these weren't the tears of a grieving orphan. They were tears of relief, tears of coming home. That night, after the storm had passed, the ranch lay drenched but whole under a clearing sky. Eli sat on the porch of the small cabin, a warm blanket Silas had given him wrapped around his shoulders. He watched the moon rise, casting a silvery glow over the plains. For the first time, the wind didn't sound like a mournful cry. It sounded like a lullaby, carrying the sweet, earthy scents of hay, horses, and rain-soaked soil. It smelled like promise. The rifle was still beside him. He thought about the choices he'd made. He had taken a life, but he had also saved lives. He had stood his ground when every instinct told him to run. And he was beginning to understand that out here, in the vast, untamed West, that was what made all the difference. Silas's voice broke the peaceful quiet. "You're part of this ranch now, Eli. You're part of our family. Don't you ever forget that." Eli nodded, his chest tight with an emotion so powerful it felt like it might burst. His eyes shone in the moonlight, reflecting the first real sense of belonging he had ever known. The McAllister Ranch, a fortress that had once seemed impenetrable, had opened its gates. It had opened them not just for him, but for the hope he represented. As the first hint of dawn began to paint the horizon in shades of gold and amber, Eli stood up. He realized something he had never dared to dream. The West was cruel, yes. It took and it tested. But it could also forgive. It could heal. It could give a broken boy a second chance at life, if he was brave enough to take it. He picked up the rifle. It no longer felt just like a weapon. It was a symbol of everything he had endured, a testament to his survival. The ranch stretched out before him, endless and full of promise. And for the first time in years, a real smile touched Eli's lips. It wasn't the smile of someone who believed the world was suddenly safe. It was the smile of someone who had finally, against all odds, found his place in it. The wind whispered through the prairie grass, a soft, warm breath of a new day. And the orphan who had once carried only the weight of his losses, now carried something infinitely more powerful: a future, a family, and the unshakable belief that even the harshest land could learn to forgive.